This is the Ring of Honor, a.k.a. Shane T, boy, the baddest champion you ever seen, boy.
This is Mr. Anderson.
This is good old JR Jim Ross, and you are listening.
You're listening to Knockouts in 3 Counts.
Cover! We got a new world champion!
That might be one of the craziest knockouts I've ever seen in my life.
Knockouts in 3 Counts is the podcast leading to the real deal, baby!
Knockouts in 3 Counts starts now.
Ooh, what up, no? It is another Tuesday. This is Knockouts in 3 Counts. Click, click, boom, let the bodies hit the floor. I'm fucking 31. That means I'm getting fucking old. In the meantime, this is Knockouts in 3 Counts, man, and we have a lot to talk about coming this weekend, because that's right. They gave my ass a microphone for Lights Out Championship 13 again. I don't know what Friendo was thinking, but hell do we got a hell of a main event coming for you this Saturday from Wayne, Michigan at the Hype Athletics Center. And we've got one half of your main event, Mr. Askar Askar, making his debut on the show before he steps into the cage this weekend against past guests of the show, Austin Bashi. So like I was saying before we hit the button, man, thanks for the time. How you feeling headed into this weekend?
My brother, thank you for having me. I'm feeling good. Dialed in, had a good long camp. You know what I mean? Been knowing about this fight for 12 weeks, a little bit over 12 weeks actually. So had a nice long, hard camp and dialed in for this week, ready to make this weight and ready to get in there.
I like it, man. I've been looking stuff up for the fights, and I've gotten to call Austin's last few fights with Lights Out. So I've done my research, seeing what you had coming into this one too, and I think this fight is definitely shaping up to be one of the tougher tests that Austin has had thus far in his young pro career. With that being said, man, I've been doing a little bit of research headed into this, and I've seen that you've had a lot of changes in your training camp and the way you're putting things together for this fight. So with that being said, tell me how we got to this fight, and tell me about training headed into this one.
Yeah, definitely. Training's been, it's been different for this one. But it's always switched around. Every couple of years, I just, I either change the camp or change the way I go about things. And this one is, and anytime I change, I become a new fighter. That's one thing too, so I add something new to my game. So I was living out in Colorado for a few years, and I just moved back home to Chicago now that, everything's kind of simmered down with the coronavirus and all that bullshit. And the MMA scene here is back to where it used to be, a little higher in training, intensity. So I'm back. I've been training at a few different gyms. I'm doing a little bit of cross training between a few different gyms where I don't have like one set place I go to every day. It's more like I control my schedule. I control my strength conditioning. I control my striking, my jiu-jitsu, my recovery. That's the biggest key I changed for this fight, because I felt like being at a big box gym, it's like the biggest problem you have sometimes too is like you're going through the system where you're just like putting into a cookie cutter method. You know what I mean? Like you're training hard, you're doing this every day. It doesn't matter how you feel. Tuesday you're sparring, Wednesday you're grappling. If your back hurts, they don't care. You're doing jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? So it's like I was able to change it up a little bit and just listen to my body and make sure I was doing the right things at the right time to peak at the right time.
Now, that's one of the things that was interesting to me in the interviews I watched leading up to this, because I know you were training out at Factory X with fellow past guests of the show like Josh Fremd and some of the other guys who are out there. I mean, it's a hell of a camp for you to be at. But the point you bring up is a very interesting one, because it's one that we've heard multiple times, from a guy like our buddy Miles Jury, who was doing his thing in the UFC, was at Alliance. He left, went to Arizona, and went to Power MMA for a little while, and then decided that Alliance was where it was supposed to be. Now, for you, it seems like it's the opposite, where it's kind of like, like a pond full of fighters at that point, and there's a lot more guys versus being in a situation like you're in now. With a smaller training camp. How do you think being able to train at these different gyms and get these different looks, how do you think that's going to benefit you in this fight?
I mean, I look at it like this. Every time life changes, you know what I mean, consistently for all of us. And where I'm at the point in my life right now, I feel like this was the perfect scenario for this camp. You know what I mean? Especially coming off the last one. I was living in Denver. I was barely making ends meet in terms of freaking being able to pay the bills just to live there, because Denver is so expensive. And I fought 4 fights with Factory X. I went 3-1. I was doing good. I was improving. That one loss was a split decision where I felt like I won. So I should have been 4-0. But it is what it is. And it was just, it got to the point where I was burning myself out trying to just work and live there. And I just needed to change the scenery, because that's the thing. It's like right now I'm out in Chicago doing my thing, building my camp and dictating how I want. Next fight, I might be out in Florida. Next fight, I might be out of California. You know what I mean? I'm not a tree stuck to the ground. I could do and go wherever I want. It's just I just don't want to the commitment of one gym where it's like they restrict you from leaving or going or this or that. You know what I mean? I want the gym to know that I'm coming in to get some work in with the guys, help the guys improve. But then when I need to go back home, or I need to do this, or I need to travel around, they're fine with that. And if they're not, then I can't be part of the team. Then it is what it is. You know what I mean? There's a million gyms out in the world that are willing to take fighters for their camps and let them go after they're done fighting. You know what I mean? That's the thing. Denver, Factory X wanted me to live in Denver. I just couldn't live there any longer. You know, it got too stressful living in Denver.
I totally get that, man. Go ahead,
So
Corey.
that's a different approach to me. I never even heard of that.
Yeah, you know what I mean? A lot of fighters are like this, but the problem is what happens is you start talking to a head coach of a gym, and he starts spluing his thing, and it's like he talks you into what he thinks should be your path. But it's like everybody has a different path. You know what I mean? Everybody has a different path, and everybody should kind of like go with the flow. And that's one thing I realized about my career. It's like when I let a dude kind of tell me to, like, almost son me, where he's trying to be my father. I got a dad. He's downstairs, you know what I mean, doing his thing, chilling, watching the Contender Series. So it's like I don't need anybody from outside of my immediate life, my immediate family, telling me how they think I should go about my career. You know what I mean? Obviously, I have a manager for that to give me kind of like a advice on how I should, you know what I mean, manage myself. But as a coach, I'm like, your job is to make me a better fighter, not to tell me where to live or what to do, what this or that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, and that's interesting too, because that's like an old school way of looking at it. Like I first came around MMA in 2006. Back then, you didn't really have any of the big teams or any of that stuff, especially in like states like Michigan and things like this, man. You would train, maybe you might do your kickboxing here and you might do your jiu-jitsu over here. You might go to this boxing gym over here, but then there might be this MMA gym over here. So you're getting better MMA rounds over here. To me, it just is a real throwback to what we saw in the early days of MMA and getting looks from a lot of different places. I mean, another guy who we've seen do that a lot lately has been Sean Strickland, who just won the middleweight title. We've seen footage of him sparring at Teixeira's gym with Pereira and all them, all while I know for a fact he's still training out there at Extreme Couture with all the homies out there too. So, I mean, I, for one, don't think that it's a bad idea at all. And in doing my research on some of these interviews, I found out that one of the people you've been training with is also a fellow past guest of the show and Michigan's own Mondo Gutierrez. So tell me about training with Murcielago and getting it in with Mondo and how that stuff is going to help you for this fight.
Hell yeah. Mondo's one of those guys who I've known for a while. He used to come out a lot before the coronavirus when, everything was unrestricted. And I trained with him a couple times in Chicago. And then when I moved out to Denver, we didn't see each other for a little bit. But when I came back, the first thing I thought about was, I'm like, as soon as I get back to Chicago, that's one of the camps that I'm going to go put in work with. And, Mondo's a good look for the next fight I'm fighting. He's similar stature, similar style, similar attributes, and I got to go in a few times this camp to train with Mondo and put in that work. And I feel like, man, being up there with those guys just gave me a different look and a different vibe, It was a nice look. I love that gym.
Yeah, man, they're definitely one of the gyms that's putting out a lot of guys into the UFC out of Michigan. You've got not only Mondo, who was on The Ultimate Fighter, you had Chaos Williams, who's out of there, who's doing his thing. You got Charles Energy Johnson, even though he may not train here in Michigan all the time. I know he's part of the camp as well. You've also got, one of Detroit's own, Clarissa Shields has been getting work down there too.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, Mercy's definitely got a list full of killers in there, and it's definitely not a bad place for you to be training. With that said,
too,
you're right.
He's a dog. That's a hell of a training partner to have. Shit.
Yeah, man. You get in some dog rounds with Mondo. I'm ready to see, hopefully see him get back in the cage here soon too. I know he's looking for a contract since he got off The Ultimate Fighter. But another thing that I was reading, going into this and kind of doing my research is one of the big things I've heard you talk about headed into this fight is how living back at home and being able to live and train with your brother, who's, also a fighter as well, and having more of a easier time with the nutrition. How much has that made this fight a more smoother camp for you, both weight cut wise and just how do you feel energy wise with that?
Yeah, so the biggest blessing about like my family, I feel like all four of us competed in a martial art. Like even my youngest brother, I'm the oldest. I've been fighting since I've been, 14. I've been training. The second oldest, he's 27 now. He's done. He's retired, but he's still in the fight game. You know what I mean? He's probably not going to fight ever again, but he still trains with us and moves around this and that. But too many injuries keep him away. And then my brother Motaz is the one that fought about early September, and he had a 9-second knockout. And then my youngest brother Ferris, he's 18 years old. There's a 10-year gap between us, but he wrestled in high school all 4 years. You know what I mean? So the best thing about us is we all understand combat sports. We always help each other train. You know what I mean? If it's me training with my brother Motaz, the one that's competing right now, like we put in work daily. Me doing mitts with my brother Asif, and you know what I mean, just building strategy together. And then even my youngest brother, in terms of he's a high school wrestler, I could go get that work in with him. You know what I mean? And put those extra sessions of just wrestling in. And the best thing about us is we all understand nutrition and weight cut, and that's one thing that helps this camp in terms of like being dialed in. You know what I mean? We have each other's back. We've been pushing each other. We've been there for each other. Anytime I need advice about something, or I feel like I should be doing something different, they're always there for me to reach out to and ask. So that's one thing that helped this camp. Like being around them is just a different, especially because being around fighters is one thing, but being around fighters that are your brothers, that's a different, it's a different level up.
Especially bringing that responsibility as the older brother into all the equation, man. That's got to add a whole different dynamic to it. Trying to kind of keep over everybody and make sure everybody, like you say, you're asking your own questions, trying to get your own answers, but also point everybody in their own right direction at the same time. That's got to add a little bit of a
100%,
interesting dynamic.
Anytime any of us has, like, obviously me and Motaz are the ones that are fighting right now. Anytime he has a camp, I'm there for him. I'm holding mitts for him. I'm drilling with him. We're doing extra runs. You know what I mean? And the same thing for this camp. Like, we hit mitts this morning. We went for a run. You know what I mean? Where he's making sure that he's there for me anytime I need something. If I need to go in terms of fight week, it gets a little hectic. So if I need to go get this made or that made or get my shorts, or you know what I mean, we got each other's backs. That's the best thing about it. And honestly, the biggest one is the weight cut help. Like they all understand what a weight cut is. So anytime like I need something taken care of, they're there for me.
It's something just about having that comfort and knowing that you've got people when you're going into battle, man, because those that haven't stepped in the ring, stepped in a cage, like, I mean, it's a whole nother thing. And having that security of knowing you've got your people around you before you step into the cage is definitely an advantage. And it's something that's interesting to talk about because, like I said, I got to call Austin's last few fights. And that's one thing with that when that kid comes into the cage, man, they come out in droves for that dude. So with that being said, we've talked about, how you feel with the matchup. I know you were having a really hard time getting matchups headed into this fight, obviously with COVID and all the stuff that was going on with that. What are your thoughts on this fight with Austin Bashi? And tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the matchup.
Yeah, so obviously I know the arena is going to be packed, but it goes back to one quick thing that we were talking about with the brothers thing. It's like in high school when we used to go fight in backyards or, you know what I mean, at the park, it was just me and my brothers, you know what I mean? And we're walking up to the park and it doesn't matter how much people were there to support or watch or whatever. So that's how I feel like this is kind of going to be. It's like me, I have obviously a little bit of fans coming down from Dearborn because I am Arabic and Palestinian, so I have a lot of people that are reaching out for me. They're reaching out to me that are telling me they're coming from down there. So I should have some fans, and I have some fans driving out from Chicago because it's only a 4-hour drive, and then obviously the most important people there are my immediate family, my mom, my dad, and my brothers. And yeah, I mean, Austin's a tough kid. He has a good record. He's been wrestling his whole life. Obviously, he's a good competitor, but I feel like stylistically, I'm not a good matchup for him. You know what I mean? I do very well against these short, stocky wrestlers. I feel like I got a good style against them. I'm hard to keep down. I'm strong. I got good conditioning. You know what I mean? This is 25 minutes for a belt. So it's like, if he can keep the pace, he can keep the pace. But man, it's going to be hard to keep that pace, especially when I'm in front of you, putting pressure on you. You know what I mean? Putting my elbows through your head, putting my hands through you, putting my jab on you, kicking you. It's like, I want to see if he could take it. The most important thing for me is I'm going to put Austin in a fight on Saturday. You know what I mean? And it's going to answer a lot of questions in his career, So it's not going to just be him coming and grappling. He can grapple all he wants. Can he grapple for 25 minutes? I highly doubt it. We're going to have those MMA gloves on. I'm going to be cracking him with elbows and hands and feet. And he's going to get tired, bro. He's going to get tired. You know what I mean? Wrestling gets you tired, especially if you want to freaking try to grapple with those MMA gloves.
I like it, dude. I see this fight being a dog fight, dude. But I mean, with that said, do you think? With that said, with you thinking that he's going to be very wrestling heavy headed into this fight, do you feel like the stand up point of this fight is going to be what makes the difference for you in this one? Is that kind of like what you're looking at going into this one? Is a lot of his wins have all been whether it be grinding somebody out and beating them up, catching somebody in a submission or something like that. Do you feel like the stand-up is going to be where you have the advantage here?
Honestly, no. It's at the end of the day, this is an MMA fight, right? It's not a wrestling match. It's not a kickboxing match. The kid's obviously got good striking. He's got good striking. He throws good high kicks. He throws good hands. He throws with heat. You know what I mean? And I have to respect that. I can't just be like, this is going to be a wrestling match. But I know that my game is to put a stick in your face and try to like cause damage with pressure. You know what I mean? His game is to get in there, hit you with a few strikes, and then penetrate the takedown. So it's like, I know we're going to wrestle, and I'm fine with that. And I know we're going to strike, and I'm fine with that. All I know is it's just like you guys said, it's going to be a dog fight, and it's going to be a battle of who got better conditioning. You know what I mean? And this is going to be the first time where it's going to be deep waters for him, I feel. And that's where he's going to have to answer a few questions, and I'm going to be the one asking him when I'm standing in front of him.
Yeah, if you really truly can push them into them, the past the 15-minute mark, like you say, that wrestling, it's hard to keep that type of pace for extended rounds, man. That's really hard, and especially if you're able to counteract the wrestling early and kind of make them use that energy. I could imagine that's going to suck on his gas tank even harder.
Exactly. I've had fights before where I had guys come at me at the first round with the strongest kind of wrestling they could possibly give me. And I knew in my head in those fights where I was like, okay, this guy's using all his strength. And I'm giving back, obviously, a good amount of strength, too, to equalize so he could be dumping himself even more. And then as soon as the second round starts, their arms are heavy, their back is heavy, their shoulders are heavy, their hands are heavy. And I'm able to keep at least 3 foot distance away from him. And every time he penetrates, now I'm able to sprawl before he even thinks about shooting. You know what I mean? Oh, I'm feeding him my uppercut or whatever. So it's like, he can go as hard as he wants. It all depends on how he uses his energy. And a lot of times I've seen in his past fights is he uses his energy off the bat, but a lot of these guys are willing to accept. Man, I don't got that kind of mentality. You're not gonna make me accept. You know what I mean? I'm not the kind of dude that's gonna accept. I'm gonna keep coming at you and keep moving until you either let go or you know what I mean, or we're at a distance.
I like it, dude. Go ahead, Corey.
You see it all the time watching fights. To your point, guys that are kind of willing to accept the position compared to guys that are willing to immediately scramble upon any given opening.
Exactly.
You see it even in the highest levels. Watching UFC, watching One Championship and stuff. It makes the biggest difference in the world compared to somebody who's willing to kind of accept the positions. I mean, these wrestlers, when they try to implement that game plan, if you just do everything you possible to counteract it, I know it's not an easy feat. I'm just kind of saying it like, just do it. But it really is. If you're able to you feel your butt touch the ground, you immediately do everything you can to get up. It seems like that it's successful more often than it isn't. I mean,
exactly. It's a mentality. It's a mentality. You know what I mean? A lot of guys, they get taken down and they're just like, man, this is so hard and heavy. And I don't want to get back up. I'm already tired, and they lay there. I don't have a fucking single inch of that in my body. You know what I mean? If we have to scramble for 25 minutes, we'll scramble for 25 minutes. And if I'm dead gassed on the feet and he's able to rock me, then, God bless him. And, you know what I mean? All the strength to him for being able to do that. But, man, my conditioning I feel like a fucking jet fuel plane right now from this long camp. So if he's able to do that, I will be in shock, So we're going to test. It's going to be conditioning versus conditioning.
You brought up the fact that sorry, Kyle.
Go ahead.
You brought up the fact of the long camp, 12 weeks that you said earlier in the show. That's not necessarily normal on the regional scene. Kyle had mentioned it's kind of hard for you to find fights at the moment. How do you feel about that long of a training camp?
Every time I've had a long camp, I felt like I show up to the fight mentally prepared, you know what I mean, and physically prepared, which is important. I like it long. I'm not lying. I like it long, and that's one thing I liked about the Austin matchup. It's like I know he's a tough kid and a big record and a big prospect, so I knew it was one of those things where it's like the most important for me at this point is fights that don't fall through. You know what I mean? Like you could go fight a tin can, and then all of a sudden it's fight week and he's not there. You know what I mean? And then you just wasted your 6 weeks. Congratulations. It's like me knowing I'm fighting a guy like Austin, 12 weeks, when they told me 12 weeks ago, 13 weeks ago, I was like, I know this fight's going to happen. You know what I mean? I know for a fact this kid's showing up. I'm showing up. and I'm showing up in, you know what I mean, 100%, 10% ready. The most important thing was, though, is like even talking to a few MMA fighters, Mondal, Sergio Pettis, a few guys I was training with, is making sure I peak at the right time, making sure I take deload weeks, you know what I mean? Because I'm the kind of guy that's like, another thing goes back to my brothers. I'm the kind of guy that goes hard all the time. Like I would dig a hole into the ground as deep as I can, you know what I mean? So sometimes they're there to like, yo, chill out, put the shovel down, you're chilling, you don't need to go as hard, you know, take a recovery day. And it's like, it's crazy because I tell myself, I'm like, no, I don't need recovery days. I don't need this. I don't need that. But that's, like I said in the beginning too, it's like, that's one thing I prioritized this camp was my sleep, my recovery, ice baths, sauna, you know what I mean? Making sure that I'm like getting 8 hours minimum of sleep every night, feeling good, my nutrition. So I feel dialed in, the most I've ever been, you know what I mean?
Well, that kind of leads into something I wanted to ask you about, because that's another thing that I find very interesting about not only this fight, but the matchup. Like we said, you know, with us being in the Michigan area, we've seen a lot of what Austin's done, but I've also seen a lot of what you've done, whether that be fighting LFA and the names that you've gotten to fight along the way. I mean, what are your thoughts of the matchup in terms of, in my opinion, and doing the research, getting ready to call this fight on commentary? I mean, the way I see it, this is about as good a matchup as you can get outside of the UFC that you're going to get, because Austin, is, I know for a fact, has already been being looked at by the UFC. I've seen your fights with LFA. I feel like you're right on the door as well. What are your thoughts on the stakes of this matchup? And do you think for either one of you guys, if you guys have an impressive performance, do you think that this fight gets you a call to the big show?
Of course. I feel like that. I know that he's been looked at. I feel like obviously I've been looked at for the last couple of years. I feel like winners should be signed to the UFC. Winners should be signed to the UFC. This could have been a Dana White Contender Series fight. This could have been a main event at a Dana White Contender Series fight, you know, with some of these fights that are on. But that's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is fighting a kid of his caliber to give me that experience, you know, because that's what I'm trying to stack at this point. I'm trying to stack that experience, because the most important thing about the UFC too, what people tend to forget is you can get in there. You can get in there. Congratulations. Go ahead, make your 10-10, 12-12, and then burn yourself out from fighting high level competition because you're not ready for it. But I'm like, I've been through it. I've been weathered. You know what I mean? And honestly, respect to Austin for taking this fight, because if he's able to get through me, he's ready for the UFC. When I'm able to get through him, I'm 100% ready for the UFC. I've fought, you know, you said an LFA, high caliber athletes, guys with double his record, guys with a lot of experience. So it's like, I feel the winner should be sent to the UFC straight up, you know? It's one of those matchups locally. There's no better matchup, you know, in the bantamweight division in the Midwest right now.
I was going to say, not even locally. I mean, you're not going to find very much of a better matchup like that in the 135-pound division in America right now, because I mean, everywhere you look,
major organizations.
I mean, you can't. I mean, at this point, you're at the point both of you guys are where you're at that part where it's like top prospect range. So at this point, another thing that's very interesting too is what I like about this fight also is that you're talking about, you know, like you just mentioned, you talk about how many guys do you see come through the regional scene who, you know, okay, you're 10-0, but who the fuck did you fight? Exactly. You know, the thing I like about this fight is if you look at both of your records, I mean, you literally look down. Like, I mean, Austin's fought a lot of people that were higher caliber than he was. Like we mentioned with you fighting an LFA and getting the type of competition that we're seeing there. I mean, you guys are both kind of like right on that cusp. And like, talk to me about that. When you're at the spot where you're at, and you guys are both kind of at the same point, really, in that you're right on that that cusp of going to the UFC. How important does it become when you're talking to your management or your team or whoever's helping you put these fights together? How important is it for you guys to not only find good matchups for you, but to find fights that make sense in the standpoint of, okay, I'm not just fighting a guy who's another body, but I'm fighting a guy who, if I beat this guy, is going to be able to progress my career. Because that's one thing I've always heard for years, even from a good buddy of mine like Miles Jury, who fought in the UFC and Bellator and all those. You know, that's one thing that I always heard him preach about. You could have 15, 20 fights, but if you fought a bunch of turd cans, like, that's not going to really do you. I mean, it ain't going to do you no good once you get to somebody who's worth it.
But there's also
100%.
a huge argument too, though, to the fact of getting like the Contender Series show and stuff like that off of a huge highlight reel. And sometimes
but if you didn't beat anybody good, it don't mean shit.
Yeah, but sometimes you're able to get those highlight reels a little easier against the lower level competition. So
for sure,
you know,
but then you're in the
talk
UFC
to
for
me
how
about
long?
weighing
3 more fights, and then you're out. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
a lot of those guys get burnt up quick, bro. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I've trained with high caliber UFC fighters with Chris Gutierrez, Jonathan Martinez, Yusuf Zalal, like these guys, David Oyama, these guys. It's like you could have a highlight reel of 7-0, 6-0, all finishes against tin cans, bro. When you get in there with those guys, it's a different level. There's levels in the UFC. There's levels in the UFC. We all know that, and it's like I feel like me and Austin are definitely at that level where it's like we both get into UFC, we can crack the top 20, top 25 off the bat. You know what I mean? This isn't no top 70. I built up my record to 7-0, all first round finishes against tin cans just to get here, and you know what I mean. I'm at the number one question I get nowadays, which I love, is it's like, man, are you like scared? You know what I mean? Because I work at a local gym, so it's like you get a lot of people that go, oh, are you nervous? Are you this? Are you that? And it's normal. It's normal because people portray, and a lot of people, they think about fighting, they get nervous. And I go, I don't remember the last time I got nervous for a fight. You know what I mean? I don't get nervous. I'm like, this is my life. This is my job. I do this every day. I'm like, I fought Brazilians, I fought Russians, I fought different kinds of dudes. You know what I mean? So it's like I'm not worried about the fight itself. You know what I mean? I'm worried about if I can perform to the best of my abilities. You know what I mean? And I know I can if I have a good camp. So it's like, it's one of the most important things to me. And me fighting a guy like Austin and beating a guy like Austin is going to tell me like I'm more than ready. You know what I mean? And it goes back to the same thing. It's like I know a guy like him is going to show up. I know, you know what I mean? And he knows a guy like me is going to show up. It's not no bullshit fucking you could get a matchup and then he falls through and then you get another bum and then congratulations, you got to have first round finish. You're confident and then you're padding your record and your confidence. And then when you get to the UFC and you're wondering why you're out of a job and you're not making no more money and you got to go get, you know what I mean? It's just funny. It's funny to watch it. And I'm happy with the way my career has been playing out because I know when I get there, I'm going to be in the top 20, top 15 off the bat.
Well, that kind of leads into something I wanted to ask you about because, you see, especially with the way MMA and getting into the UFC has kind of evolved over the years. Back in the day, it used to be, okay, you get on the Ultimate Fighter or maybe you get a short notice fight or whatever the case, and then you got to hope that you do good in there and then they pick you up. For both of you guys, what are your thoughts on the idea or the mindset that, I like the fact that you guys are taking such tough fights before you're getting into the UFC, because I feel like a lot of what we're seeing with most of the people that are getting into the Contender Series, obviously there's exceptions to the rule, like past guest of the show, Jamal Hill, but by and large, a lot of the people that are getting in to the UFC via the Contender Series, you get into on these contracts and okay, you might get a 5 fight contract, but you might only be getting paid, 12 and 12 or whatever it is until you fight out that first contract. How much do you think getting to fight fights like this on the regional scene is going to serve you once you're able to get into the UFC? Because I was talking about this with Austin when we last had him on the show. I think that going the way that you guys are going, taking such tough fights on the regional scene, I feel like in a lot of ways that's going to kind of be able to like leapfrog you over some of the people in the UFC, because a lot of people, it seems as though the Contender Series is the route to go. But for guys like you, who, like you said, you both have got a list full of killers that you guys have fought. I feel like that's only going to make your stock worth that much more when you get into the UFC, not even just from a standpoint of who you're fighting, but there's also a lot more value to a guy who comes in here and you can say, well, okay, it might be my first UFC fight, but I've also fought boom, 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 boom.
Exactly.
And the UFC is watching all these guys. So what are your thoughts on the value of that fight too? Because I feel like this fight's only going to make you guys look that much better if you get the call to the UFC after this is over.
Exactly. I mean, you see it on Dana White Contender Series sometimes. It's funny because there's certain guys on Dana White Contender Series where you're like, this guy has to go through the contenders. Like, this guy has way more experience than some of these Contender Series guys. And the number one thing the thing you hear from Dana is, oh, this guy got 5-round experience. He got 5-round experience. That's one thing I have. I have 5-round experience. I fought 5 rounds before. I'm about to have my second 5-round fight. You know what I mean? So it's like I'm about to be a champ in 2 different promotions. So I feel like with that kind of leverage, like it was like I said, you go into the UFC in the top 25, top 15. You can't start on you don't start on a low level contract. You know what I mean? You start on a decent contract with decent money. So it's like off the bat and you get what you're worth. If you're 7-0, 6-0, 10-0, whatever, padded record, you're gonna get into the contender series. You get in, you're starting on a super low money, and then you're in the top You're top 80, top 100 in the world at that division. It's like that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to prove with this fight that I'm in the top 50, top 30. You know what I mean? Somewhere up there, depending on where some of these motherfucking guys at Topology are gonna rank me, and then whatever happens once we jump to the UFC, it's like you never know how these guys rank it. But I feel like once I get this win, I'll be in a good spot for them to understand that I'm a high ranked dude at this division. So it's like once I get signed to UFC, I'm top 25 off the bat, no waiting.
Speaking of the Ultimate Fighter, real quick, are you guys watching this tonight? Any of you got this on?
I don't have anything on yet.
So that Angel Pacheco and Danny Silva fight just went over. These guys both had over 200 significant strikes in the fight. That's pretty damn crazy. Danny Silva won by decision.
Wow. Yep. That's what I thought.
101 significant strike. 6.
Wow. It's been wars all day today outside of the first round finishing the first fight.
Yeah.
The second fight was a war. This one was a war. That's crazy.
I like it, dude. I love watching the Contender Series. I think it's not going to be long before that really kind of overtakes the Ultimate Fighter and what we see with that.
Bringing fights on like that, it ain't gonna have no choice, dude. These are
100%. I mean, it's also cool to have fights different days of the week, man. I don't know about this. They're like, oh, just Saturday. Forget that, dude. We should have 3 or 4 days a week of fights.
That's what I'm saying.
Start copying that NFL model. Start bringing in Thursday, Monday night fights. What happened to Friday night boxing?
People are always like, "Oh, it's too much. It's too much to keep up with, bro. It's sports. Keep up with it when you feel like it. And if you're a diehard fan, you're gonna keep up with it. It's like it's fun to have that. It's like there's some nights you'll be chilling with the family, and you know what I mean. We're out here and just you're like, man, I wish there were fights on tonight. I just finished a hard day of training. I'm chilling. We're watching TV. It's like I want to watch some fights. It's Thursday night. There's no fights, or Wednesday night. Whatever. So. It'd be nice to switch it up and have it. That's why I love Tuesdays.
So I totally agree with that, but that raises another question, and who better to ask than a fellow fighter and things. So one of my things, since the UFC has gone to the model that they're on now, where they're having events every weekend or every other weekend, while like you said, as a fight fan, I love seeing fights every weekend. But what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts as to the argument that while all of us love seeing more fights, do you feel like having that many fights kind of takes away from the value of those fights when we're getting to like pay-per-views or like a fight night? Because in a lot of ways, it seems like because there's so many fights, whether that be the fight nights or Contender Series or whatever, you don't see guys really kind of getting built up the way they used to. Where when you had like the one pay-per-view a month, you knew if that guy was fighting in the fucking main event, they were up there. Now you've got fights every weekend. I feel like it kind of takes away from a little bit of the star power that people are getting because there's just so many fights out there. What are your thoughts as to the volume of the fights we're seeing these days?
See, I definitely get that point. But it's like, man, I don't know. As a fighter and martial arts and as a fan, obviously, I'd rather see the fights. That's the first thing. I want the fights to happen. You know what I mean? I don't want it to be like, Anderson Silva versus John Jones might happen a couple years down the line. Fuck that shit. Run that shit now. You know what I mean? I want to watch the super fights. I want to see the fights. I want to see him happen. I don't want if the fighter could fight and turn around quick. Let him turn around quick. Let him be more consistent. You know what I mean? And it's like I get it, but man, I don't know. It's like some people talk about that. They'll be like, oh, they used to build up the freaking pay-per-views bigger. But it's like, bro, the UFC puts on some of the craziest pay-per-views. You know what I mean? Every other month, like. We got December's an insane pay-per-view. Leon Edwards versus Colby.
2 of them.
Royval versus Pantoja. You know what I mean? El Kakuya versus what's his name? The Batty. So it's
Patty
like,
the Batty,
bro, and then we got Alex
Jones,
John
Stipe.
Jones. Yeah, exactly. See what I mean? It's like, bro, it's like if you're a real fight fan, these cards are getting built up every day. It's like just because you know what I mean, the cup is full of water, it doesn't mean, you know what I mean, you got to be like, oh man, it's full of water, but I'm not thirsty. It's like, bro, it's like. It's full of water. You should be grateful that it's full and we're getting all this quality, instead of being like, oh man, I want it to be built up and feel like it's a bigger event. So, bro, the events are amazing. It's like, I get it outside of a few like superstars like Conor or back in the day, Ronda Rousey, and you know what I mean? Where it's like when these guys walk out, it was a different atmosphere. Like even Khabib towards the end, it's like, yeah, that I get it. And hopefully we'll have another star like that in the UFC, where we were all interested to watch. But right now, I just love the quality of events, especially how the UFC stacks the pay-per-views. They stack them every couple of months.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also, a couple of added points. I feel like first, guys like you who are like how we were saying earlier, right on that cusp. It provides so much more opportunities for guys like you to get in there and prove their worth. Essentially, like you say, it might be harder. It might be harder to make superstars, but I feel like that could be promotion based and less so because there's fights every week. If anything, I think the fights just provides more opportunities for these athletes to actually get themselves out there on the big stage and get these eyeballs. Even if my biggest issue really in the last couple of years has been the fact that they haven't stepped away from the apex. I feel like that's hurting a lot of the athletes a lot without
for sure.
You see some of these guys that they get one good highlight reel type of finish. You get that at an Apex event and you get a couple claps. You get that at, Nashville or some shit. The whole crowd's going nuts. Everybody now remembers and is excited to watch your next fight. So that
100%.
would be my only real complaint with the way that the UFC is doing it. But besides that, I feel like it just, like I say, it provides so much more opportunity to all the other guys, to guys and girls to build their name and potentially become the next Conor, Ronda.
See, I get that. I get that because there will be superstars if there was a little bit fewer. Obviously, because when there's fewer events, there's going to be superstars. But I feel like the more consistent events, the more consistent different fighters come in from different backgrounds and different places of the world, and it draws more fans. You know what I mean? It draws more fans. Like it's 2023, and there's people that I never imagined from 2015, 2016, 17 talk about fights, and now they're fight fans. You know what I mean? And just because a certain fighter is somewhere, you know what I mean? And he's from their background, he's from a place that they used to be, from overseas or from where the original hometown. So that now they're a fight fan because of that reason, because we have more of that, And it's like maybe in a couple of years we'll be able to go back to that where it's like now we'll have those crazy superstars because it's becoming, you know what I mean? It's becoming to the level where it's like if we could get as much fans as soccer in the world, that'd be crazy. As much fans as like the NFL in the world, that'd be, you know what I mean? But I don't feel like the UFC's at that level yet, but it's like starting to like pick up steam in terms of more fans coming in, more people understanding fights, Like the last event, my brother fought at APFC out here in Indiana. Man, it was packed. It was packed. And I remember a lot of times when they ran the shows over here in Hammond, Indiana, they were okay. They had a good amount of people, but it was never packed. But it was like, now, bro, I've seen people that never talk about fighting in the crowd. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, this guy came out because either my brother was fighting or somebody else he knew was fighting, so it's starting to grow a lot more in terms of like the widespread fans, more than anything.
Well, guys, we just got the merger with WWE. Who better to take the show on the road than the WWE fan base? You never know, dude. We could be seeing some new stuff. Maybe we see fights every week in different towns. WWE does it. Why can't you?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question too. I mean, what are your thoughts on this whole merger with UFC and WWE? For us personally, obviously, anybody who follows our show, and if you're new here checking this episode out, we appreciate you. Hit the subscribe button, like button, share the buttons. But with that being said, that's been one thing that's really interesting with that merger because I think, obviously for years it was always like MMA fans don't fuck with pro wrestling at all. But I think with having Ronda Rousey go over there and do what she's done and Brock be able to bounce back and forth between WWE and UFC, I think now that there's that merger, I think that there's going to be a lot more doors open for that crossover. And I think it would do a lot of the UFC guys a lot of good. In that said, what are your thoughts on UFC merging with them? And do you think it's going to be an overall good look or bring some more light to MMA or the UFC as a whole?
No, for sure. I think I was always a kid. When I was a kid, I was always a fan of WWE. I loved watching it. You know what I mean? Especially right in the beginning of when I was starting to get into the UFC. Obviously WWE was there. It was big. So it's cool to see that they cross cross together and intertwined. And it's like some of the fans can cross over. And some of the MMA fans, obviously, like you said, like they do have that kind of like attitude, ego thing between the WWE. But it's like you could give it a chance and see if you like it and this and that. But I think it's cool that they cross promoted or they fusioned so they were able to like have the fans cross and understand. And are the platforms or anything becoming like similar? Do you know?
In a lot of ways it is because I mean WWE is getting major TV deals. They had the one that they had with Fox that's going to be over in 2024. It was just announced the other day that they just signed a new deal with USA that's going to be worth like 1.4 billion or whatever it is. And as a whole, man, I mean, WWE, if you look at the numbers right now, a lot of people always go back to the Attitude Era, which is I'm around the same age as you, so I grew up in the same time period. Stone Cold, The Rock, all those guys. That was what I grew up on. And in most wrestling fans' eyes, when you hear them talk about it, they always say, "Well, the Attitude Era, man, the Attitude Era was where it's at." Blah blah blah, whatever. But here's the thing: if you actually look at the numbers right now between live events, what they're getting in gates, what they're getting in TV numbers, and all those things, WWE is arguably as hot now as they were, if not more, than they were in the Attitude Era, which is what's so funny to me because everybody talks about, oh, well, it's going to be more it's going to be more hassle for the UFC. If anything, I think WWE brings more eyes over there because they've got a much bigger platform than what UFC does, even though UFC is the big dog, when it comes to MMA. I think on a global scale, having gotten to go to WrestleMania, I go every year to do stuff with the shows and all that good stuff. I mean, I was there in LA at SoFi this year. When you can have in the 2-night show, you can have over, what was the last number I heard? Over 102,000 people in 2 days there for a show like that. And you're bringing in people from fighting, you're bringing in people from wrestling, you're bringing people in from sports and all those things. I think if done well, I think that this merger can only help, MMA as a whole. But before I ask you a couple of these questions as far as it goes to the world of wrestling, I got to give a shout out to our sponsor. And he's also the sponsor of Lights Out Championship 13. Shout out to Potter's Tree Service. If you need your tree shop, don't go and call Hacksaw Jim Duggan. I heard he's not in the best health right now, but Asa Potter can get you together. Potter's Tree Service, make sure you use those links. Tell him Knockouts and 3 Counts sent you if you need to get your trees cleaned up. You need to get your wood chipped. Do all that shit. Asa is your guy. Hit him up, Potter's Tree Service. Tell him Knockouts and 3 Counts sent you. But you mentioned that you grew up watching wrestling. So you got to tell me, what was some of the stuff you grew up on? Who are some of the favorites? Do you ever check any of it out now? And what are some of the wrestling memories that stick out for you?
Man, tell you the truth, it's been a minute. It's been a long time since, you know what I mean? So I don't know none of the new stuff, but I remember D-Generation X was one of my favorite things when that happened. That was sick, Obviously, John Cena, I don't know how people stand on him now, but he was like me and my dad and my brothers loved him, when he first came out. I remember when he first became a thing, it was like super cool to us. But those are the Vegas memories I have where like I think back at WWE and I think of it, but it's obviously been a couple of years and being like engulfed in MMA, it's like I almost shut myself off from everything else except maybe except maybe basketball, just because I'm a fan of just switching it up of even just away from combat sports. A lot of people I watch boxing here and there. I don't watch a lot of wrestling, but you get sick and tired of like, just the same thing. So I gave basketball a chance and I watch it here and there. But that's the biggest memory I have. John Cena and the Generation X, Triple H, Shawn Michaels. Back in the day was sick.
You can't get wrong with it. And, even to our point with, WWE and how they've built, it's no surprise that they're doing what they are because two of the people that you just named, I mean, Triple H is basically the CEO of that fucker at this point.
I saw that. I remember when I heard about that, I was like, damn, that's crazy.
Yeah, man. I mean, he's right in the thick of it. Everybody was nervous to see how that was going to go when this whole Endeavor thing happened, because in a lot of ways, that was the thing that was able to get Vince back in, power, because I don't know if you saw any of the stuff. He basically got voted off his own island, and then this whole sale happened. So yeah, to see them in there, and then Shawn Michaels is down there running NXT, which is their developmental too, and NXT is doing the best it's done in years as well. So I mean, with the names that you mentioned, those are a lot of the guys who are now running the ship. So I feel like we're seeing a lot better of a product these days too. With that being said, before we get to your last thoughts on how you see this fight finishing, another thing that we've been hearing a lot about in the world of MMA and things to change things in MMA, we just saw the debut of Chris Lieben as judge here in the MMA for UFC and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on guys like him and other ex-fighters getting in there, for the judging? Because we just saw the fight between Valentina Shevchenko and Alexa Grasso, which I'm not even mad that Grasso kept the belt, but it's hard not to say Valentina got robbed when they scored the 5th round of 10-8.
He got robbed for sure.
I just don't know how. I've watched the fight back, and I just can't. I don't. How that.
No sense.
Yeah,
Makes
like
no
I
sense.
said. Yeah. So how do you think having judges like that would help change things?
I mean, it's cool. It's cool. I like it. But it's one of those things where it's like, man, it's not my biggest thing with judging. Isn't that they need to be ex-fighters. You know what I mean? My biggest thing with judges is they just need they need to be trained. They need to be trained in the martial art. You know what I mean? They need to do jiu-jitsu. They need to wrestle. They need to, not even, they don't have to spar, but they have to like learn striking, and they have to. I feel like it should be mandatory, like, you know what I mean, time, like community service or whatever. It's like you have to go in to be able to keep your license. You got to train a certain amount and by a accredited dude and have a good understanding and watch maybe sparring and watch fights and not just when you need to go work the event, get there. You know what I mean? Because I'm not like, I like that Chris Liebman's in there, but it's like, man, I seen Chris Liebman get knocked out a couple times, bro. I don't know about the fucking, So it's
how's
like
the clarity up there, big dog? Them bare knuckle fights you put on, them things were tough, bud.
So it's like, I don't know. Sometimes, and then certain fighters have certain obviously egos, because that's what you have to have as a fighter in terms of like being able to compete. So, and a certain mindset, you're like, man, a guy with a good jab is way better than a guy with a double leg. You're like, bro, listen, you can't be biased like that. Just because that's your style. So that's why it's like I can't see a lot of fighters do that, because a lot of us, especially as people, we kind of like reflect off of what we see. So it's like, as a fighter, you might be like, oh, if he's landing a few strikes, even though he's getting held down for 14 minutes, he landed better strikes. It's like, no, he got wrestle fucked for 14 minutes. He's done. You can't be biased in your own way. So I feel like it should be more like train the judge. He should have a competent understanding and try to be as unbiased as possible. Give it a fair shake. My biggest problem too is with the MMA judging is like I was saying, when I was with Factor X, I had those 4 fights. I had that one fight. I fought Diego Silva, and I felt like I won 2 rounds to 1. I beat him the first 2 rounds. He ends up clipping me in the 3rd round when I got a little comfortable, because in my mind I was ahead, and it was a mistake and a lesson learned. And I was able to come back out of that round and still end up on top and put more damage on him. But they gave him that round. And the crazy thing is, one of the judges gave me the first, the second, and then I lost the 3rd, obviously. And then the other 2 judges gave him the first, you know what I mean? And then me the second, and then him the 3rd, So it's like, I ended up losing the split decision by one judge. I needed one judge to say I had the first, you know what I mean? And I would have been money. So I went up to one of the judges after that scored the first round to Silva, and I asked him, I was like, hey, can I just understand why you scored it to him? I'm like, I felt like I was in his face. I was sticking him with moves. I was countering him. I was, you know what I mean? I kept him on the back foot. He didn't want to shoot. He didn't want to grapple. He was all focused on just countering, and I was able to counter him. And the judge just pushed me off. He was like, don't worry about it. I scored it how I scored it, because that's how I do it. It's like, bro, at least give me a reason, So it's like, that's one thing I feel like judges need to be held accountable for too. It's like, give us a reason. We need a breakdown of what you saw, so we understand for the future. And then obviously, if we can't do that, then these guys need to get trained. They need to get trained. It should be mandatory. And I'd rather see that than see more fighters go into judging, because it's like, man, fighters still can make mistakes. That's the last thing we want. I want guys to be, and it's like, if the fighters want to go into judging, sure, do it. But you need to be trained as well. It needs to be the same schedule,
Do you think open scoring would help any of that, though?
You said open scoring?
Yeah.
I've had a fight where it was open scoring. But no. I mean, listen, the last thing I want is like, obviously, I fought my first fight when I had open scoring was my first fight in the middle of coronavirus. I fought this kid out in Kansas City. And I remember the first round was over, and I looked over and I saw the iPads, and they were like 10-9 me. And I was like, nice, I'm winning. You know what I mean? And then the second round, 10-9 again. And I was like, nice. I'm like, straight cruise control, And then it kind of put me in a kind of mindset where it's like, okay, I'm winning. Let me just cruise, And I didn't like it. Because I've had fights before where it's like it was the 3rd round, and I noticed the guy was kind of welting up, so I pressed on the gas because I didn't know what the scorecard was. So I'd rather like that. But it's like, all I want is to be an open score fight. Look over, knowing that I won, knowing that one of the judges gave it to him, I swear to God, I'll jump out the cage and fight the judge. So I'm like, you just scored it for him? Are you crazy? I'm like, bro, I just beat this dude for the last 5 minutes. You're gonna score for him? So fuck the open scoring. I'd rather the competent judges, you know what I mean? The trained judges, the ones that understand how the clinch feels, the ones that understand how the striking is thrown, the ones that understand how to grapple on the ground and what positions are they where, and the ones that understand how to mix it all together and how hard it is to mix it, and then those guys are going to be the ones that change kind of the judging for us, not these fat dudes sitting behind the you know what I mean, clipboard talking about, oh, it looked like he landed damage. Yeah, that round's for him, And then some of these other judges where it's like, honestly, like I seen this video on for one of the judges in New York where they were like changing the scorecard right after it was red. It's like this dude started changing it. Like, what is going on? How can you do that?
That kind of seemed like that in that Valentina fight too, man.
Yeah,
with the way that score went, it almost seemed as
Yeah.
though a guy was like, "Oh shit, I got Grasso up 3 rounds, but Valentina done." I almost feel like that they tried to do that to like. It just seemed like they did that to try to like make it not look as bad. But that was the first thing I thought with that was it was like my man
Sounds like they just need to open a judges school or something, judges college for MMA. Let's go.
That was the first legitimate argument that I've heard from an active fighter who's dealt with it, with open scoring, and kind of had their negative outlook, I guess you can say, on it. But I feel like the counter argument to that is the guy in the other corner now knows for sure that he's down. So isn't it now his job to bring that pressure to you? Yeah, you can be on cruise control all you want, but if he still brings it in your face, there's only so. I feel like the open score, to your point, like, yeah, if we could just get AI bots that got scoring perfect and they did it correctly every fucking time. But it's never how it's going to be. There's always going to be biases. There's always going to be underlying tendencies of people to like you say, oh, I've trained more in kicks my life and he landed some nasty kicks that round, so I feel like that's his round. I feel like the open scoring from an outsider's perspective is truly the only way to, especially when you have some of these athletes that are only fighting like once or twice a year. There's so much that goes into some of these fights for these guys, and it's like
100%.
If you don't know what's on the line, like in that Valentina fight, I'm sure that fifth round may have played out a little different. She may not have went for that head and arm throw had she have known that she was up on the majority of the scorecards. But Alexa Grasso may have been, providing more. It's just, I feel like if you're the one that sees that you're down, then it becomes your responsibility to try to win the fight, where it shouldn't necessarily take away from the thing that I think would be the helpful thing, which is open scoring.
I think it's a gray area that we're not going to get to for a long time still.
Yeah.
It's just something that we're not going to
get
to.
It is weird. It is weird. Yeah. And I at least admire the fact that you speak from a point of experience on it. You've dealt with it and you've already been in that situation. So you know what you're saying. I'm just speaking from an outsider's perspective, but I've seen a lot of those LFA events. I've seen a lot of the Invicta events and stuff that they do out there in Kansas. And I do think it helps the athletes, I feel like, but
to a certain point, but it can go back to the thing we were talking about before. Like this sport's a mentality, you know what I mean? And it's just like accepting a position. You get taken down, you accept that position. So I'll tell you the truth. When I was fighting that kid, I felt like when he saw that 10-9 scorecard, he's like, damn, I'm down. You know what I mean? And negative thoughts keep building on negative thoughts. And then your mind, you're over here thinking like in terms of like a tenacious fucking monster coming forward. You're in the middle of a fight. You're in the middle of a war. So it's like sometimes those doubts creep and you start losing to them. So it's like you're like, man, I'm 10-9. Man, as long as I don't get finished. Now I'm at 20-18. As long as I don't get finished. You know what I mean? It's like you have to be a special kind of fighter to be like, okay, I'm 10-9. Let me go balls to the wall and come forward. So it's like we're gonna get a mixed bag of like results from that. I feel like, we're gonna get some guys that are out, they're gonna show ugliness. They're gonna come hard in the second round because they're like, I'm down. And then you're gonna see those guys, and we have so many fighters that are willing to accept just getting taken. Many guys are like, they see a 10-9 scorecard, they're like, oh man, I'm losing. Okay, it's all
over.
good. You know what I mean?
Fight's over. Yeah.
That's why I like the one thing I said before. It's like I've had fights before where I knew I was losing. I didn't know the scorecard, but I knew I was down in my mind. I go back to the corner. I go, did I win that one? And they're like, no, you're losing. And then I come back after the second round. Did I win that one? They're like, no, you're losing, dude. 2-0. You got to do something. And I go out in the third round and I press on the gas and I end up getting the dude out of there. And I'm like, thank God I knew that I was down because it goes back to a mentality thing. You know what I mean? Most guys would have just been like, bro, I'm losing. It's all good as long as I go home and I don't get finished, So I feel like we're going to get a mixed bag of results, especially because we have so many fighters with different mentalities and different attitudes. So I'd rather just the judges be trained correctly, and then everybody has their own equal opportunity where you don't have to kind of like be in the cage, psyching yourself out. You already have to go through a mental battle in that moment. So it's like you looking at to the right and seeing an iPad that says 10-9, and now it's like instead of thinking about the dude in front of you dealing with the skill set, you're over here dealing with this number that you're sitting on, and you're like, man, I'm down. What am I gonna do? It's like, bro, don't worry about what you're down. Worry about how you're gonna counter his moves and how you're gonna stop him. So I just feel like that's too much. You're putting too much of a variable to think about the numbers.
Yeah, you're not even thinking about the coach's instructions or nothing in the corner. You're just thinking about, like you say, these numbers on a screen at that point. Yeah, I understand that point. It definitely adds a big variable to it.
I'd rather just the judges be competent. You know what I mean? Train them correctly so they have a good system. And it's like when we look at cards, we don't see 10-8 from Mike Bell. You know what I mean? This crazy motherfucker. We don't see a 10-8. We see a 10-9, and we all understand why it's a 10-9 because we all judged it 10-9. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing that would be very helpful to that as well is, like, we've also heard so much difference in what's deemed as important when they're scoring rounds. Like back in the day, it used to be you could take a guy down, and if you were on top of him for the whole time, or maybe even if he got back up, if you took him down like 6 times, you would be winning the round. But now it seems as though fights are being judged a lot more based on the damage you're doing and things like that too. So I feel like if they were able to come up with like a more concrete, this is what a round should be judged on. Like it goes damage first, then control. You know what I mean? Just have it broke down so what a fight's being judged on. Because like we talked about earlier in the show, when you're talking about Dana White's Contender Series, Dana straight up says it. I want you to come in here and finish somebody. It don't fucking matter if you win a 3-round decision. That 9 times out of 10 ain't going to do you any good unless you just beat the guy up for 3 rounds, which in that fight, you're not in that situation. You're usually not fighting a scrub. So, I mean, it's got its pros and cons, and it's going to be definitely something that'll be interesting to see as we go along as far as MMA. Well, dude, we're getting towards the end of the show. Last question I got for you, for anybody who's on the fence of coming out the Lights Out Championship 13, Wayne Hype Athletic Center. How do you see this fight with Austin Bashi going? How do you see it finishing? And what are your what would you say to anybody on the fence about getting a ticket for this one, and let them know where they can find you at?
Get off the fence and get yourself a ticket. That's what I would say, honestly. This is a UFC caliber fight in a local promotion, you know what I mean? In a local league, in a local town. So it's like if you get the chance to come out for the ticket prices you're getting, you're going to get a high-quality event and high-quality main event, So it's like if you're not coming to this, you're missing out. And then if you're not tuning in, I think it's Spectation Sports. If you're not tuning in to watch it, you're honestly missing out on a great fight between 2 high prospects. And I'm ready to go to war, bro. I'm ready to go to war. I'm ready to get this week done with, get the weigh-ins, get the face-off in, and replenish and be ready to get in there with Austin and test him and just feel his ass and just test him through 25 minutes of war or less. I feel like it's going to be less. We're definitely not hitting 25. But if we do, man, I hope it's a dog fight and we're both just huffing and puffing in the end on the ground. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I'm excited, bro. I'm excited. Thank you for having me on, guys. It was good talking to you. And if you want to follow me on social media, my Instagram is my name, Askar MMA 94. And I got a TikTok too, so it's linked. So if you want to just jump on that too, I put some funny stuff on there here and there and all that good stuff. Thank you for having me, though, boys.
Hell yeah, man. We'll definitely do it. We'll definitely do it again soon, man. Like you heard the band say, you gotta be in the building this Saturday. They're giving my dumb ass a microphone. So if you can't watch it live, you can watch it on Spectation Sports, and who knows what the hell is going to come out of my mouth, because I don't even know. But with that being said, man, these fights this weekend are going to be a good time. I am looking forward to getting down there, getting to business. Shout out to Matt Friendo. Make sure you check out Lights Out. And this Thursday, if you're new here, make sure you hit the fucking subscribe button, because we just had the main event of the last LFA card, and Devin Smith, who just had that nasty spinning back kick knockout. Shout out to Devin from Murcielago. And then we've got the main event from last week's card. Mitch McKee will be making his return to the show this week to talk about his big win over McFadden over at LFA. We're going to have to be talking about what's next for him, maybe a title shot, who knows, and we'll all be doing it while we see if the Lions let me down against the Packers. So until next time and in the in-between time, make sure you hit that motherfucking subscribe button. Make sure you're in the building. Lights Out 13 coming at you this weekend. Peace.